This PC next to me costs $300 and is made up entirely of brand new parts. Yes, you heard that right. Only $300 and everything in it was brand new. No used hardware, no refurbished, no open box like new, none of that. Also, it didn't require any limited time deals, like there's no Black Friday sales in here, no holiday specials, nothing. Very standard pricing and is easy to put together with modern parts that are readily available. I challenged myself to make this with a strict low budget because it's really easy right now to build a PC if you have any decent amount of money. But as you go lower and lower in price, it becomes increasingly more difficult, and I always find it fun to change up the target budget for these videos so that I myself don't get bored doing the same builds with the same parts over and over again. Thus how this $300 PC came to be. Now, as you can imagine, this build will have a number of limitations to get it down to a price that low, but still, I think that the overall performance may surprise a lot of people. As always, I'll have links down in the description from various places you can get the parts from. I actually teamed up with Micro Center to put this together, and it will be the cheapest there because they have crazy good prices pretty much all the time. But even if you don't have a Micro Center around, prices elsewhere should still be pretty similar if you're willing to be flexible on different brands and models of equivalent parts. But yeah, without further ado, let's check out what's inside. To start things off, we have the Ryzen 5 4600G. As some of the more experienced folks may have guessed by now, I had to go with an APU for this system. It's just the only way to fit it within that tight of a budget, all brand new. This will act as both the CPU and GPU, with AMD's Vega 7 powering the graphics side of things. Now, it was a very close decision between this and AMD's newer and more powerful Zen 3 Ryzen 5 5600G, but due to the $30 price difference between them and me trying to stay strict to the budget, I had to go with the cheaper Zen 2 4600G. For gaming, there won't be too much of a difference between the two because they both have the same Vega 7 integrated graphics, and that will be the bottleneck in most scenarios. To cool the 4600G, I used the included stock cooler. There wasn't really any spare money at this low of a price point, and even if there was, it'd be much better spent elsewhere. Next up is the motherboard, the Asus Prime B450M-A2. I wasn't really being picky here. I basically went for the cheapest motherboard I can find in stock, and it happened to be this one. I will note though that I did not consider A320 or A520 chipsets because I wanted the ability to overclock the iGPU, which I think will be very useful here considering it's the weakest link in the specs. Also, the cheapest A320 or A520 board I could find at the time was only $10 less than the B450, and in that case it was a no-brainer to spend the extra $10 to get overclockability. For memory, we have this kit of 16GB DDR4 G.Skill Aegis 3000 CL16. If I could do this over again, I would have gone with a different kit. Right now, the sweet spot of price to performance is 3200 CL16, but this one came in a tad cheaper, which is why I originally chose it, but I now kind of regret that because this build is relying on the integrated graphics, which is tied to the system memory. It essentially uses it as video memory, and the speeds will impact the performance. We're not talking about huge differences here. In most titles, it'll probably be single-digit % FPS differences, but still, similar to how I spent a little bit more on the motherboard to overclock, I should have done the same with the RAM speed to squeeze in that little extra FPS. For storage, I went with this Inland Prime 250GB NVMe SSD. If you've watched my other videos or live streams, then you'll know that I've been pretty adamant in recommending at least a 500GB SSD for modern systems. Unfortunately, I had to break that rule for this build. Again, I was only working with $300 here, I had to cut some corners, and storage capacity was unfortunately on the chopping block. At least I didn't have to regress to a mechanical hard disk drive though. Next up is the power supply, and oh boy, you're gonna love this one. I'm pretty much committing a PC building cardinal sin here, grabbing the cheapest power supply I could find. This is the Solid Gear Basics 500 watt, which comes in at a ridiculously low price of $20. It had sketch written all over it, but I was blinded by my goal of coming within budget, so I gave it a shot. First thing you'll notice is the ketchup and mustard cables, which isn't indicative of the quality itself, but man, look at how short these cables are. They are barely long enough to reach the motherboard. This unit is a little misleading because it's advertised as a 500 watt power supply, but it's only rated for 26 amps on the 12 volt rail, basically the only rail that most people care about in modern PCs, which means it's really only good for 312 watts for the most important and power hungry parts of any system. Now in theory, this should be fine because the total system power draw will be very low since we've only got an APU in here. But power output aside though, this unit doesn't even have an 80+ efficiency rating. So I had to do some detective work, and based on the numbers I was measuring in the system versus what was being measured at the wall, I calculated this was around 75% efficient with the system at full load, which explains why it doesn't carry that 80+ badge. Now I do want to remind you that 80+ efficiency is not related to the quality or reliability of a power supply. People often mistakenly correlate the two, but they should be viewed separately. Remember that gigabyte power supply that Gamers Nexus covered that exploded? Yeah, that was 80 plus gold rated. So again, efficiency rating does not mean quality or reliability. But back to this unit, why did I even go with it at all? Well, have you seen the prices of power supplies lately? They're kind of expensive right now, even for lower wattage entry-level budget units. And to be honest, you'd be much better off finding a used one for this price. But since I was strictly limiting this build to only new parts, I didn't have that much of an option. I mean, it can't be that bad, right? Wrong. After building the PC and fully testing it with the unit inside, which it did fine by the way, it didn't explode or catch on fire and burn my house down, I did come across a forum post of someone who was also interested in this unit because of how cheap it was and did some limited testing on it. There are no in-depth full professional reviews for this out there. Most of these lesser known units simply don't have full reviews because the handful of professional testers that exist out there only have so much time and don't bother with units like this. So this hobbyist review is the best that we're gonna get, and they tested it at a load pretty much identical to what my build is running at, and they were measuring ripple at 250 millivolts. For reference, the ATX specification calls for ripple limits of 120 millivolts, and you want as little ripple as possible because too much of it in the long term can shorten component lifespan. This unit comes in at more than double the ripple limits of official ATX spec, so that is a bit alarming. So yeah, this is a case of I did an oopsie. I did this so that you didn't have to, and do as I say, not as I do. If you can, I highly encourage you to buy something that's been thoroughly reviewed and tested with at least decent results. This power supply may have worked for this build, but in the long term, it could have consequences. So yeah, just be aware of that. Alright, now we can move on to the last part, the case, which I also cheaped out on, but fortunately here, it doesn't have dire consequences as with the power supply. I went with the Thermaltake Versa H17. This was $50, which is pretty much as cheap as cases really get, no matter how bad they are. You'll be pretty hard pressed to find one going for much less than this unless you catch a sale or like a mail-in rebate. This is a very basic case. It comes with only one exhaust fan in the rear, it has a power supply basement, and that's pretty much it. There's no transparent side panel, so you can't see the inside once it's closed up, but in this situation that works perfectly because the power supply cables are pretty ugly and there's no graphics card or RGB to show off. There is always the option of going caseless and laying out all the parts like an open test bench. That would save $50, which for a build this cheap is massive, but I felt like that was kind of cheating, so I didn't do that. Okay, now let's take a quick look at the complete parts list and price summary, which this comes in just a hair over $300 before tax. If you're getting the parts at Micro Center, it'll actually come in a little bit less because there's that $20 motherboard and CPU combo discount. And if you're getting these parts anywhere else like Amazon or Newegg, the total will be about $20 or $30 more. Here's footage of me assembling the build, which went really fast and easy since there was no discrete graphics card nor any additional fans or things like that. And in the meantime, I want to shout out Micro Center who sent over the parts. It's always a pleasure to work with them, literally one of the best partnerships I have. They're super hands-off when I'm making videos, and they're always down for whatever ideas I can come up with. And for the month of December, they've got a ton of holiday savings going on, so whether you've been nice and got all your holiday shopping done early, or naughty and wait till the very last minute, they'll have you covered. I mean, just tons of different stuff on sale, like this Ryzen 7 5800X, which is phenomenal value at this price, and this Lian Li Landcool 250, which is a case that I've personally built in and can always recommend for something that strikes a good balance between price, aesthetics, and airflow. And if you're planning a PC build as a beginner, definitely check out their online PC builder that guides you through the part selection one by one and checks for the compatibility so that you don't choose mismatching parts. All this will be linked in the video description, definitely check it out. With the system fully built, I guess let's look at the not so glamorous B-roll. There's honestly not much to see. I guess I can show off the somewhat tidy cable management that I did, but beyond that, there's nothing very notable about this build aesthetically, which is fine because we know what's really important, the performance, which we'll conveniently segue into now. I for the most part tested this at 1080p and was really targeting a gaming experience of at least 30 FPS average with no noticeable stuttering. In some titles, particularly the faster paced ones, 30 FPS felt too low to the point that it affected gameplay, so for those I lowered the resolution or applied scaling. For overclocking, I had the memory set to the 3000 XMP, and the integrated Vega 7 graphics was set to turbo mode in the BIOS, which brought up the stock 1900 MHz clock speeds to 2200 MHz. First are some general synthetic benchmarks, just going to show them on screen quickly. As always, feel free to pause if you want to look closer. These values alone don't really mean much, they're to be used for comparison. If you have your own system, you can run these tests as well, most of them are free, and you can see how your numbers compare side by side to this $300 PC. Now for the games, I'll start with the easier to run esports titles. If these are the games that you generally stick to, then this system will serve you well. In League of Legends at max settings, the system was averaging well over 120 FPS with 1% loads above 100 FPS. In Valorant, also at max settings, the system averaged 100 FPS with 1% loads in the mid 70s, a very good number so far. In CSGO at max settings, it was averaging in the low 70s FPS with 1% loads right at 50. So again, this is very playable, especially if you're working with a budget this low. You're probably on a 60Hz refresh rate monitor, so yeah, you don't need to go crazy above it. Next is Rocket League, playing with both render quality and render detail set to the quality preset, which is one step below the max presets, and this build was averaging over 60 FPS with 1% loads right at 30. For the Rainbow Six Siege built-in benchmark at the preset low settings with the render scale pulled up to the 100% for a true 1080p resolution, the system hit right at the 60 FPS average with good 1% loads in the 50s. In Apex Legends, I was running at the lowest settings possible, and that was averaging 45 FPS with 1% loads in the mid 30s, which while it didn't hit 60 FPS, I think was very playable. In Fortnite, playing in performance mode with view distance and textures maxed out, it was surprisingly pushing a high average 100 FPS. The issue is, Fortnite being Fortnite, the frame rate was often dipping, though in this case it still managed to stay above 30 FPS for the 1% loads, so it was nowhere near as distracting as in my previous video where it got into the single digits and was visually stuttering. At this average and 1% low performance, especially for a 60Hz monitor, I found it very playable, at least for a filthy casual like myself. Next is Forza Horizon, a more recent AAA title, and this is where we can start to see very noticeable degradation to visual quality in order to get a smooth experience. Playing at the very low graphics preset, the system cranked out high 40s FPS with the 1% lows in the high 30s. It's smooth enough to play, but definitely not pretty. You can see by the graphics and the textures on the ground and stuff, it doesn't look the best, but you can play it. Halo Infinite is the first title being presented that wasn't able to hit that 30 FPS minimum at 1080p, even at the lowest preset graphics settings. It missed it by a few FPS, and to be honest, even at 30 FPS, Halo doesn't feel that good, so I had to drop it down to the lowest render scale allowed in the menus, which was 71%. This got the average FPS up to 40 with 1% lows in the 30s, and while that may not seem like much, that bump in FPS was very noticeable. Going from 30 to 40 FPS is a 33% gain in itself, and at these lower frame rates makes a big difference. Another title I had to drop the resolution down was the newest Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. At the preset minimum graphics settings, I was seeing an average of 30 FPS at 1080p, but given that it's faster paced, 30 FPS was not a good experience, so I enabled NVIDIA image scaling, which brought it down to 720p, and that shot the average frame rate up to above 50 with 1% lows just shy of 40 FPS. It actually didn't look that bad. NVIDIA image scaling did a pretty good job at 720p versus if I just played it at a baseline native 720p with no scaling. Doom Eternal follows the same trend in that it's just too fast paced for a game to enjoy at lower FPS, which at the lowest 1080p preset was running at an average 35 FPS, but lowering it down to 720p boosted the average FPS above 60 with 1% lows in the upper 40s for a much more enjoyable experience. Elden Ring, on the other hand, I found very playable at a lower frame rate given its slower paced, clunky combat, so it did not require a resolution drop. At the preset low graphics settings, 1080p, the system was pushing an average 30 FPS with 1% lows in the 20s, which I didn't find to be an issue at all. And last but not least, Cyberpunk 2077, the slayer of all budget PCs. No one should really expect to play this game on a system this cheap, but I like to test it for the fun of it anyways. Pulling out all the stops, playing at the lowest graphics preset, lowest texture quality, and enabling FSR 2.1 and cranking it all the way up to ultra performance, I was averaging 34 FPS with 1% lows in the 20s. Was it playable? Yes. Was it also some of the ugliest graphics I had seen in a while? Also yes. And no, bumping it down to 720p doesn't help. The average and 1% lows barely changed, and it just got way uglier. So there you have it. That is what I was able to squeeze out of a $300 all brand new parts budget PC. What do you think? Was the performance as good or as bad as you originally thought it would be, or was it right around what you would have expected? For me personally, every time I do lower end builds like this, it's a nice reminder of how capable modern day entry level parts can be, in this case, the integrated graphics. Hear me out on this. Just being able to play games at all on my platform of choice with my friends is the majority of what makes a fun gaming experience. Like that right there is already 70% of it. That last 30% is the bells and whistles, you know, like playing at a higher resolution, with higher graphic settings, at higher frame rates. Those things are nice, sure, but I don't need them to have fun. I think perspective matters a lot too. Don't look at this PC from the point of view of a person who has a fully decked out high-end system, because yeah, it's gonna look super crappy. Look at it from a point of view of someone who doesn't have a PC and has very little money. Going from no computer at all to this one, despite how budget it is pretty big. Look at all those games I was able to play earlier. You think someone with only $300 is going to complain about having to play at low settings or sub 60 FPS? No, they're gonna play the crap out of anything that this will run and eventually upgrade it down the road when they can afford to. And please don't bring up the whole argument about how consoles would kill this computer, because yes, even I will concede that all the games I tested would look much better on console, but not every game is cross-platform or even available to console. So you're gonna try to tell someone to go play League of Legends or CSGO on a PS5? Come on now. Some people simply want a PC to be able to play with the rest of their friends who are already on PC. I've always hated that PC versus console debate, because people who buy gaming computers also often end up using it for much more. Get back to me when you can edit photos, videos, produce music, record podcasts, respond to emails, code, write a research paper, make freaking Excel spreadsheets and PowerPoints. Let me know when you can do that on a console, then we can make the comparison. But till then, don't at me, bro. To wrap up the video, I have one question for you. You saw what corners were cut in this build. So if you were given an additional $30, what one thing would you upgrade from the parts list? And you can only choose one. Maybe you'll upgrade the APU, getting that 5600G instead of the 4600G, or maybe the storage perhaps. Another $30 pretty much gets you into 1TB SSD territory. That would be quadrupling the storage that this system has, which is kind of crazy. Or, you know, there's upgrading that janky power supply, which really isn't going to affect the performance or give you any like real tangible quality of life benefits, but it does buy you some peace of mind of a higher quality unit. Let me know down in the comments below. I look forward to reading what different people choose. But yeah, that's gonna be it for me though. Hope you all enjoyed and found this video either entertaining or helpful in one way or another. Big thanks to Micro Center for teaming up with me on this, and thanks to you all as always for watching and continuing to support the channel. Be safe out there, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.